My name is Sarah. You heard my story about my first night as a wife, the night I believed everything changed. But there was one thing no one told me that night. This is what happened after. After my first night as a wife, I thought my life was finally safe. I truly believed that love had saved me. That night felt warm. It felt calm, but I was wrong. That night was only the beginning. What came next was much worse. I had a kind husband. I lived in a big house. People looked at me and thought I was lucky. They smiled at me. They said I had everything. But inside that house, I felt small. I felt quiet. I felt alone. I often sat at the table by myself. I heard my own breath. I stayed silent. I thought marriage was my new beginning. I thought pain was behind me. But I did not know one thing. The real nightmare was waiting inside the family. I lived in that house, but I was never family. After the wedding, my life looked calm from the outside. James was kind and respectful. He spoke softly to me. He never raised his voice. I thought I was finally safe. I remember watching him read at night while I sat nearby. I felt warm then. I thought this marriage could heal me. His mother was polite at first, but she was always distant. She smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. She spoke to me like a guest, not like family. I knew she was watching me. She never asked how I felt. She never asked what I needed. Still, I told myself to be patient. One evening, she said something that stayed with me. She looked at me and said, "You are here because of a debt." She said it calmly, like a fact. Then she added, "But you are family now." I heard the words, but I felt the distance. I thought about them many times after that. I whispered to myself that I should be grateful. At dinner, we often sat in silence. James talked about work. His mother nodded. I ate slowly. No one asked me anything. I felt invisible. Sometimes, I ate alone, when James was busy. I heard the clock on the wall. I watched the light fade from the window. I stayed quiet. I thought her words meant acceptance, but her actions felt different. She said I was family, but she kept me outside. I felt confused. I felt small. I thought peace was real, but regret slowly followed. When James started to travel more, the house changed. He left early and came back late. Sometimes, he was gone for weeks. I watched his car disappear from the gate. I felt the house grow quiet. I knew his work was important, so I stayed silent. I told myself this was normal. After James left, his mother took control of everything. She decided when we ate. She decided what I cooked. She decided who could visit. I followed her rules. I moved slowly. I spoke less. Her friends came often in the afternoon. They sat in the living room and drank tea. They looked at me from head to toe. I felt their eyes on my back. They talked about family, money, and reputation. Sometimes they stopped when I entered the room. Sometimes they did not. I heard short comments. "She is very quiet. She is different." I kept my head down. I told myself silence would protect me. At first, I believed things would calm down. One morning, my mother-in-law smiled at me. She asked if I had eaten. She spoke softly again. I felt hope rise in my chest. I thought maybe I was wrong. I whispered to myself that patience was the answer. For a short time, the house felt lighter. The visits felt shorter. The words felt kinder. I thought I could breathe again. I believed this phase was ending. But one night, James called while I was washing dishes. I heard my mother-in-law answer first. Her voice sounded worried. She said, "She is tired." Then she paused. "She is very emotional lately." I froze. My hands stopped moving. Cold water ran over my fingers. When she gave me the phone, James asked if I was okay. I said yes. I said I was fine. I knew something was wrong, but I stayed quiet. After that, the calls changed. I felt distance grow between us. In the evenings, I stood by the window after cleaning. I watched the lights outside. I felt small, but steady. I told myself to endure. I believed silence was enough. I did not know someone was watching closely. I did not know words were being chosen carefully. Then one day, something small changed. and that change broke everything. The call came in the afternoon. I was folding clothes when my phone rang. I saw my aunt's name. I felt my hands go cold. I answered, and her voice was low. She told me my father had passed away. I stood still. I did not sit down. I did not cry. I felt the room spin, but my body did not move. James was not home. He was away on a business trip. I called him many times, but he did not answer. I knew he was busy. I told myself to be strong. I whispered to myself that I could handle this alone. I packed a small bag and went to the funeral by myself. The funeral was quiet. The room smelled of incense. I stood in front of my father's photo. My hands were empty. No one held them. I pressed my lips together. I felt my jaw tighten. I thought of all the words I never said to him. I thought of how alone he must have felt. My mother-in-law came late. She stayed only a short time. She stood beside me and spoke in a cold voice. She told me not to cry too much. She said people were watching our family. I felt my chest tighten. I looked down and said nothing. My fingers curled into my palms. When I went home that night, I knew something had changed. I felt it in my bones. That was the moment she crossed the line. I stood in the living room after the funeral. The house felt too quiet. My father was gone, and James was not there. I felt my chest tighten as I looked at the floor. I thought this pain would pass if I stayed silent. I whispered to myself to stay calm. My mother-in-law walked in slowly. Her face was cold, and her eyes did not soften. I felt my hands shaking, but I kept them still. She spoke first. Her voice was low and sharp. She said I should not bring sad energy into the house. She said people were watching the family. I felt something break inside me. I knew she cared more about her name than my pain. I thought of my father, standing alone in the rain. I felt my lips pressed together. I took a deep breath, and I finally spoke. I said, "He is my father." My voice was quiet but clear. I felt my heart beating fast. She stepped closer. Her eyes narrowed. She said I should remember my place. I felt heat rise to my face. I wanted to scream. I thought of all the nights I ate alone. I thought of all the times I stayed silent. I knew this was the line. Her hand moved fast. The sound was sharp. My face burned. I did not fall, but my body froze. I felt the room spin for a second. I did not cry. I did not shout. I stood there and breathed. I whispered to myself to stay standing. I tasted blood on my lip, but I did not wipe it. She turned away, as if nothing happened. I bent down and picked up my black scarf from the floor. My fingers were steady. I felt something change inside me. I knew silence could not protect me anymore. I thought, not today. I walked out of the room slowly. Behind me, the house stayed quiet. That was the moment I stopped being small. After that day, no one talked about the slap. No one said sorry. The house went back to normal, at least on the surface. My mother-in-law stayed cold and firm. She still controlled everything. She still looked at me like I was someone living on her kindness. I felt that she believed she had already taught me a lesson. I thought she felt safe again. I stayed the same on the outside. I spoke politely. I cooked meals. I cleaned the house. I took care of her every day. In front of others, I kept my head down. I knew this was what she expected from me. I felt my face calm, and my voice soft. People thought nothing had changed. I thought that was exactly what I needed. But at night, I did not sleep right away. I sat on my bed in silence. I opened books James left behind. I wrote notes with a small pen. I remembered every word she said. I remembered every look in her eyes. I felt my mind stay awake while the house slept. I whispered to myself to pay attention. I knew I could not forget again. I did not study to take revenge. I did not plan to fight her. I studied so I would not be crushed again. I thought of my father's voice. I heard it clearly in my head. Don't live with your head down. I felt something steady grow inside me. I looked the same, but I was not the same. She grew more confident. She grew more careless. I grew quieter and more alert. I knew a storm was coming, even if the air felt still. She thought I had learned my place. James traveled again. His suitcase stood by the door more often than his shoes. Each time he left, the house felt quieter and heavier. I watched the door close and listened to his steps fade. I thought the silence was just loneliness, but it was something else. I felt that space growing for other voices to enter. My mother-in-law began meeting her close friends more often. They sat in the living room and drank tea slowly. I stayed nearby, serving cups, lowering my eyes. I heard their soft laughter. I also heard their sharp words. One woman looked at me and said, "She is the daughter of a gambler." Another nodded and whispered, "Blood like that never really changes." I felt my hands tighten around the tray, but I said nothing. They talked as if I was not there. They spoke about family names and clean history. My mother-in-law did not stop them. She only listened and stayed quiet. I thought she agreed with every word. I felt my place in that house shrink again. I whispered to myself to remember everything I heard. One afternoon, a close friend smiled and spoke about a valuable bracelet. She called it a family keepsake she had owned for many years. She touched her wrist as she spoke. I noticed how my mother-in-law looked at it. I knew something was changing, even if no one said it out loud. The day started like many others. My mother-in-law invited her friends for tea. I prepared the cups and plates, and I stood quietly near the wall. They talked and laughed, and I moved in and out of the room. I felt their eyes follow me, but no one said my name. I thought it would be a normal afternoon. During tea, one of her friends suddenly stopped smiling. She touched her wrist and looked confused. She said her bracelet was missing. The room grew quiet. Chairs stopped moving. I felt my heart beat faster. Everyone looked under the table and around the sofa. The bracelet was not there. I thought it would be found later, and this moment would pass. That night, my mother-in-law knocked on my door. Her face looked calm, but her eyes were cold. She said the bracelet was found in my room. I felt my legs turn weak. I looked at the bed and the table. The bracelet lay there, shining under the light. My hands were shaking, and I could not speak. My mother-in-law covered her mouth and said she was shocked. She told her friend, "Sarah would never do this." Her words sounded kind, but her eyes watched me closely. I knew my honor was breaking in that moment. I whispered to myself to stay still and breathe. I did not cry. I did not run away. I sat on the edge of my bed and held my hands together. I felt my fingers turn cold. I thought about shouting, but I stayed quiet. I whispered to myself to breathe and wait. I checked the cameras that night. I hoped they could save me. But the camera in my room showed nothing. It was off for a short time. I felt my chest sink. I knew someone planned this very carefully. I thought the truth would not come from machines. The next day, everyone talked again in the living room. The friend spoke about the bracelet. I listened to every word. I remembered something small. I knew her story changed. Before, she said she always carried the bracelet with her. Later, she said she left it on the table. I felt a calm strength grow inside me. I did not accuse anyone. I did not raise my voice. I asked one gentle question. I looked at her and said, "You said you always kept it with you, right?" The room went silent. No one moved. I heard my own breath. I knew the truth was standing there with us. She tried to answer, but her words fell apart. No one said I did it. No one needed to. I felt the pressure lift from my chest. I stayed still and quiet. In that silence, I knew my dignity came back to me. James came home a few days later. I heard his footsteps before I saw his face. I felt my shoulders tighten, then slowly relax. I thought he would be angry. I thought he would shout, but when he walked into the room, his voice stayed calm. He looked at me first. He did not ask questions. He did not raise his voice. Then he turned to his mother. I watched his hands rest by his side. They were still. I felt the air change around us. He took a short breath and said only one sentence. "Mom, I trusted you. Nothing more, nothing less." The room went quiet. I heard the clock on the wall. I whispered to myself to stay still. His mother did not answer. She did not defend herself. She lowered her head and looked at the floor. I knew something old ended in that moment. The power she held felt smaller. James did not choose sides with words, he chose with silence. I felt seen without being touched. I thought about all the nights I stayed quiet. I knew this was not a victory loud enough to hurt anyone. It was a quiet end to fear. I stood there, breathing slowly, and felt my dignity return. It was evening. The living room was quiet. No music. Only two of us. I stood still near the table. I took a deep breath. My chest rose and fell. She looked up at me. No one spoke for a moment. I felt the silence press on my ears. I spoke slowly. I said I had no mother. I said my mother died when I was very young. My voice stayed low. I did not explain more. I said I always wanted a family. I felt my throat tighten, but I kept going. I thought this truth mattered. I told her I knew my background was poor. I knew I was not perfect. I studied at night. I learned in silence. I stayed quiet to survive, not to deceive. My hands were steady. My back felt straight. I knew I was not asking for pity. Then I said one clear line. I did not marry for money. I only wanted a family. The room went still. I heard my own breath. I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. She did not cry. She did not speak for long. She said she listened too much to others. She forgot to look at the person in front of her. She said rich did not mean right. Poor did not mean bad. Then she called me daughter. Her hand rested on my shoulder. It was gentle. I bowed my head. This time, not in fear, not in obedience, in acceptance. I remembered my father's words again. This time, I was standing straight. Sometimes, the people who hurt us most are the ones we want to trust. But silence should never cost us our dignity. When I look back now, I see this story as not only mine. I see it in families. I see it at work. I see it in quiet rooms where people choose silence every day. I whispered to myself that silence can feel safe, but it can also hurt. Over time, this lesson stayed with me. You can be kind and still protect yourself. You don't have to stay silent to keep peace. It is okay to speak when something feels wrong. You don't have to accept pain as love. When I understood this, I felt calmer. I thought about my past, but I did not stay there. I knew my story did not need a loud ending. I did not need to win. I only needed to stand straight. Maybe something here stayed with you. Maybe you will carry it quietly, in your own time. If you stayed with me until this moment, I want you to know something. I felt less alone when I shared this with you, and maybe you felt that too. Have you ever felt like a guest in your own home? If yes, comment 1 so I can hear you. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to stay with us. You are not alone, and you never have to be.